I don't know if you're here because you read a title in the programme or just because this is your space to come and to gather. Maybe you're here for a seminar on leading well in chaotic times because despite all the training and all the resources and however many books on leadership that you have read in your training and in your development and in your care of communities and of people, despite everything, we tend to see more examples of leading badly than leading well. And so maybe you're here today because this is just another opportunity to say, I want my future to go differently than some of the people's history that I see around me. Maybe you're here today because in a title of Leading Well in Chaotic Times, you are experiencing some of that chaos. Maybe you are feeling like so many of us that we are living in times that feel disruptive and fragile. How do you lead well in a time of shaking? So whether you're here because of the leading bit, or whether you're here because of the chaotic bit, or maybe you just didn't fancy any of the other sessions on the programme, welcome. My name is Jo Frost. I am the Director of Communications and Engagement at the Evangelical Alliance. Basically, this means that I oversee all the storytelling, the relationship building, and the gospel sharing work. What an amazing job I have. As part of my role for the Evangelical Alliance, I am the co-director of a project called the Being Human Project. This is an initiative to help everyday Christians live out and share the good news and the biblical vision of what it means to be human in this world. Because this world makes it difficult to live well and lead well in. Society is struggling with increasing inequality, depression, obesity, prescription drug use, social isolation, loneliness. Over a quarter of the adult population in England is prescribed antidepressants, painkillers, and related medication. Nearly 70% of Americans are on at least one prescription drug, whilst more than half take two. Children are being medicated with stimulants, antidepressants, ADHD drugs. Students are anxious, risk-averse, concerned for their mental health, and increasingly experiencing depression. We've seen political and economic crashes. We're facing up to the environmental crisis, and we are still dealing with the long-term implications of the COVID pandemic. This is our reality. For every single one of us here, this is either our story or someone we are immediately connected with. Doctors have little time to ask wider set of questions about a patient, so just have to treat the immediate symptoms. Teachers are under pressure to please parents and get results, teach the test. We advertise unhealthy foods next to gym membership. Our sports teams are sponsored by betting companies, and we promote a vast array of consumer goods alongside the financial products and debt relief required to sustain them. Our society is in a space of chaos. And we are supposed to live and lead well in this space. But we are just as caught up as everybody else in this space. There are three major storylines that work together to form our cultural context today. These are the cultural stories that we live in and shape how we think, feel, and act. They shape our leadership, and they shape the contexts in which we work. We are storied creatures. We are surrounded by stories, stories we tell, stories we live by, stories shape and form us. They shape our beliefs, they help us interpret events, and they even create our own sense of self. But stories aren't just fictions and narratives that live in our mind. They go hand in hand with habits, the doing of the stuff, the acting out of the narratives that we inhabit. Stories are embodied by actions, and actions need stories that explain and give them meaning. It's a feedback loop. A few years ago, I was part of a Elim church plant, in southwest France. And me and my family and my 2 young girls, we went off and we lived for a year. My kids were 3 and 5, and we dumped them in French school. They didn't speak a single word of French. What was really interesting was how the different characters navigated that experience. By the end of the year, my eldest was fluent in French and top of her class. I know, she did well. My youngest did not speak a single word of French after a year. She had taught her entire class English. What's interesting now is how formative that story has become on their now habits. My daughter now sits alongside refugees that come into her class who speak only French and translates the lessons for them while the class is conducted in English, because she recognizes how alienating not speaking a language can be in school. When the refugees started coming over from the Ukraine, she downloaded Duolingo and started teaching herself Ukrainian so that she could welcome kids into the school. My youngest daughter, on the other hand, knows that she can immediately create community no matter where she goes. No matter the difference, no matter the separation, she can always build and make friends. Those have become their formative narratives, and their actions both embody and reinforce the stories that they live in. Habits and stories go together. Our narratives of our world and our actions have profound effects on how we see ourselves and the world around us. Our cultural stories have a massive impact on us. These stories can be persuasive because a lot of the time they're built on truth, but they're wrapped up in lies and in fiction. There are 3 main stories that we encounter today. The first one is the secular story. This is a story that has radically changed the way that we think. It started as a reaction against the dominant religious narratives and authorities of the day, when 500 years ago it was unthinkable to believe in a world without God. Now it's kind of quaint to believe in God. It's naive, it's cute, it's old-fashioned. Secularism and the story of secularism has placed doubt at the center of belief. It's not so much anti-God, but it's a belief that all systems should be questioned, debated, and all external authority should be treated with skepticism. It's not a story without belief, but it declares that all beliefs are up for grabs. And in so doing, it creates a world that is contested, that can be argued about, that is fragile, and is complicated for everyone. This is the start of our chaotic world that we inhabit, where everything can be questioned and fought against. Our second story is that of the individual story. When the secular story pushed God out from the foundations of our lives and of our world, without God unifying and connecting us, we grow increasingly fractured and uncertain. Our world becomes unstable. We conclude that we can't trust other people. Everything and nobody knows what's going on. Everybody's making it up as they go along. So we turn inward to rely on ourselves. We live in a cultural story of expressive individualism. It's all about me and me projecting myself out into the world. Everything in my immediate experience supports my deep belief that I am the center of the universe. Everything orbits around me. Life is commodified, relationships become transactional. I get to choose which church best fits my needs. I get to say whether or not the worship did anything for me today, whether the seminar was that interesting to me today. It all becomes about self-fulfillment. Be true to you. We get to write our own scripts. And the role then of schools, churches, charities, leaders is not to shape or form people, but to simply allow the space to help individuals be their best self and provide safe spaces for authenticity. The failure of an individual's flourishing is the failure of the leadership to provide the space and the security that they needed in order to project themselves out into the world. This is the individual story. It's inward, it's a search for authenticity, but it's also about consumerism and serving what I need. And then the third story adds to this whole realm of uncertainty by rejecting even more givens, especially the certainty of modernism, where rationality and objective scientific truth could become the foundation of our world. Postmodernism rejects that science has all the answers because it blatantly doesn't. Because postmodernism is incredibly suspicious of certainty, it becomes that all truth is unknowable. You can't get to truth except via your own perspective. You're biased. Therefore, truth becomes completely subjective and totally personal. So when we say things like, well, that's subjective, or that's just your interpretation, or speak your truth, we're buying into this postmodern narrative, consciously or not, that says meaning can be ambiguous and truth can be interpreted. So we reject any overarching narratives and we become caught up in a power game. Deconstruction then fragments and destabilizes. This, again, can be a really good thing. Certain power structures and hierarchies really did need to be deconstructed and torn down. Around race or around sex or gender, these things needed to be questioned and pulled apart. But in so doing, there's become a desire to almost queer and denormalize everything. Nothing should be imposed and nothing should be proclaimed as normal. We have no criteria to work out what injustice looks like or what might be good. So all of these stories come together and form this destabilizing narrative that we are trying to build our lives, our ministry, our leadership, and our communities on. We're left in a chaotic time. Permacrisis was the word of the year for 2022, and I don't know about you, but I certainly understood why. We are living in a state of permanent crisis, which is a contradiction in terms. It catches this cultural moment as we lurch from one crisis to another. Political crisis, how many prime ministers do we actually need to go through? Social unrest, how many strikes do we need to have? Economic crisis, banking collapse, environmental crisis, war, cost of living crisis, personal crisis. All of these crises then interconnect. Remember back, some of you may remember, some of you may not have been born. In 2008, the subprime market in the US, a relatively tiny part of the financial system, collapsed. And in so doing, sent economic tidal wave around the world. One tiny bit took out the whole system. Or how the grounding of a single ship in the Suez Canal led to a crisis in the global supply chains. Tiny little things in an interconnected world can have massive repercussions. And so we find ourselves in a relentless, exhausting, chaotic, permanent state of crisis. And I don't know about you, but I am just tired. It's not just all the changes in and of themselves, but it's the speed that they change, that we lurch from one to another. And as these millions of interconnecting individual and micro stories compete, we end up feeling overwhelmed. And for many of us, it's too much. Navigating these shifting sands can get exhausting. Some people will look to authors like Jordan Peterson who tell you these are the 12 rules for life. Or what about Marie Kondo who gets you to tidy your Tupperware drawer and bring order to the tiniest part of your world. Others will look to you as leaders to provide answers when really You're just making it up as you go along like the rest of us. And others will simply burn out and distract themselves with a glass of wine, binge watching Netflix, while the rest of the turmoil rages. These are our chaotic times, so how on earth do we live well? I think this, for me, has been a really illuminating journey into understanding just how powerful stories can be, just how formative and immersive they are. And for me personally, how hard it is to break out of expressive individualism. Because even in just that mini sentence, for me personally, this is what I'm experiencing. I can't step out of this narrative. I am absolutely surrounded by it. And part of it is because it's true. Part of it is that I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and so are you. Part of it is that there is something inordinately special about every single person on this planet, known and loved by God. And yet, when we become the center of our story, something gets malformed and twisted out of shape. And I think for us as leaders to become more and more aware of that twisting of truth is absolutely crucial to navigating these shifting sands. The difference it can make in leadership from bad to well is simply recognizing where little twistings and deforming of truth can come in. Because these are incredibly powerful stories, and the habits that they encourage and they facilitate that are part of our world, we adopt them without even knowing. And so our challenge, but also our invitation today, is to find ourselves in a more powerful story. A story that is good, that is true, and that is beautiful. One that is capable of rehumanizing us and rehumanizing all of the communities for which we are responsible. It won't come as a huge surprise that I would suggest to you that that might be God's story. The story told across the pages of the Bible, which is our blueprint for life. The God story tells us who God is, and it tells us who we are in him. And the opening chapters of the God story, Genesis 1-3, outline in amazing poetry the truth of who God is. And it's in these potent chapters that we're introduced to the idea that theologians call the Imago Dei, the image of God. Now, good old Christian jargon, we're very good at saying it. We're not always very good at understanding what we mean when we say it. I would suggest to you that bearing God's image means that we represent God. We are ambassadors of his out into creation. We project God's character out into the world. We are like him in his attributes and in his nature. And we share in his nature as we do what he does. That is what it means to bear God's image, to represent him, to project him into creation, and to share in his likeness. Now, the ultimate example of being God's image bearer is found in Jesus. In Jesus, we see the perfect example of somebody leading well, because he represents, projects, and shares in the nature and character of God. And so when we are asking this question, how do we lead well? We look to Jesus. We look to become like him, and we look to do the things that he did. Because as Paul declares in Colossians, he is the image of the invisible God. We look to him to see what God is like, just as those that we lead look scarily to us. He is our perfect example. Jesus is both the cause of our renewed likeness of God, but also the model that we follow as we try to live this out. He communicates to us who God is, who we're meant to be, and shows us how to live and lead well. So, for the rest of this session, we're going to have a little look at how Jesus immersed himself into the story of God and the habits that he nurtured as he models to us how to lead well. And to do this, I want to introduce you to the Being Human lens. Now, as I said, I lead the project called the Being Human Project, and this is our little tool. Right, this is the question. How many here are wearing glasses or contact lenses? How many say, yeah, I see, it always amazes me just how visually impaired the human race actually is. I can see at least one naively hopeful person wearing sunglasses on their head. We all use lenses all the time, whether it's hopeful sunglasses or just because otherwise we can't see what's straight in front of us. At best, we'll spend a couple of minutes a day checking our lenses, cleaning them or whatever, but we spend our entire lives looking through them. Some of us will use figurative lenses to see and view the world, like a political lens that sees the world in terms of left and right, or an economic lens that sees the world in terms of market forces and economics, or a feminist lens that sees the world in terms of patriarchy and power and dominance. This is the Being Human lens. It's a tool to help us see more clearly who we are and the world that we're a part of. It helps us focus the vision. The point isn't the lens itself, but seeing through the lens to encounter the world that we inhabit. So right at the top, we see this idea that to be human is to be significant, that you matter. It matters that you are alive, that you exist. You make a difference by your very existence. Connection, to be human is to be connected. We matter to each other. We are, being human is not an I conversation, it's a we conversation. Presence, you are embodied. You are here, now, in time, in space, rooted in a place, positioned in a season. To be human is to be present in and of the world. And finally, to be human is to participate. We make a difference. Simply by being, you affect the world that you inhabit. So to be human is the sum of these four parts. And whether they're cultural stories or God stories, how we experience and understand these elements are formed and shaped by the stories that we inhabit. And specifically this afternoon, I want to look at the habits that Jesus nurtured in order to live out some of those stories. So, Jesus's habits. We live in an age of uncertainty thanks to the secular narrative, and therefore we are unable to source our significance. God has been taken out of the story. But Jesus, in his life, shows us an image of a good and trustworthy God who knows us intimately and invites us to know him too. Jesus nurtured habits of solitude and study. Time and again, we see him withdraw from the crowds. He removed himself from the crush of adulation and fame and sought quiet spaces to pray and to spend time with his Father, so that he could declare that he and the Father are one, that the Father knows him, that he knows the Father, that he only does what he sees the Father doing. All of this comes out from a deep, rich relationship, personal and intimate. Solitude and reconnection with the Father were primary habits of Jesus. So how much are you investing in leading yourself closer to the Father, back into the presence and the story of God? How much do you get to carve out time to get to know God and to be confident in the significance that you are blessed with, not because of what you've done, not because of the talents or the role or the position that you hold, but simply because you are a child of God, graced with significance. Leading well needs assured leaders, confident in who they are in Christ. Are you nurturing habits of silence, separation and solitude, studying and immersing yourself in the story of God? The expressive individualist story puts self-centeredness at the heart of our identity, and it twists and it strains our need for connection. We crave connection, we want intimacy, but we don't always know how to do it on generous or selfless terms. It becomes risky. Just today, I have been having so many conversations about risking relationship, of boundaries and wisdom. How do we relate well to each other? And in positions of leadership, that gets even more complicated. The life of Jesus shows us the image of a loving and reconciling God who selflessly and bravely loves us and invites us to love others the same. Jesus nurtured habits of generosity, giving his time and his resource. He nurtured habits of hospitality, welcoming outcasts and marginalized, and humbling himself as guest, not host. How much of your time is invested in nurturing habits that experience the radical generosity of God and the lavish abundance of him gifting you with everything you need, everything you could possibly want in the world? You have it all. How much do you nurture the truth of that reality so that you can love God in return by loving and giving to his creation? How are you nurturing habits of generosity and hospitality in your world and in your leadership? Because leading well needs connected leaders. And as we look to the story of postmodernism, this disruptive, destabilizing, disorientating force leaves us isolated and separated. We spend more time on our screens and on our computers than we do in present to and with each other. It matters that you are here right now, that you are sat next to someone in this time and in this space. The life of Jesus shows us a personal and present God who came near us, became like us so that we can never be alone. Jesus is the Emmanuel, not a name, but a title, a description. He is the with us God. How much do you practice prayers like the examine? The practice of noticing, of pausing in the moment or reflecting on your day, paying attention to the world that you inhabit and encounter, noticing what the Spirit is up to and prompting you to pay attention to. How much do you recognize in your world when you're being pulled to disengage? How much do you give yourself time to unplug, to get off the screen, to put the phone down, to be present in the room that you are inhabiting? Do you detox? Do you get off the relentless onslaught of ideas and distractions and things that pull your attention so that you can be present to God and the people that he has put in front of you? Leading well needs present leaders. And finally, this disordered, overwhelming, and chaotic culture that we are a part of can lead us making up our own leadership as we go along. Each one of us doing what we think is right in our own eyes. And yet, the life of Jesus shows us the image of a generous and active God who invites us to partner with him. Jesus shows us submission putting God, not us, in control of our world. He invites us to fast or practice Sabbath, the gift of being able to stop when there's still work to be done. Consider how much you are letting go of the control, and invite God and allow God to bring the order in your life and in the lives around you. There are so many practices and habits and opportunities to intentionally invest in the world that we are a part of and that we're invited to lead. So I suppose what I want to do is I want to leave you with something that makes me happy, so I'm sharing it with you. This invitation to leadership, this invitation to being a shepherd in step with God's Spirit, this invitation to becoming like Jesus, being like Jesus, and doing the things that Jesus did, this is a beautiful invitation, and one that I commend you for saying yes to, and one that I commend you for saying yes to every single day. And so I want to leave with this paraphrase of the Great Commission. These are instructions for life, for discipleship, for leading well. They have been brought to life by disciples, leaders, and fellow pilgrims over the last 2,000 years. And it is our turn to bring them to life today. So this is our commission. As you go, as you live your lives, help everyone you encounter to become imitators of Jesus. Immerse them into a community built upon the characteristics of and the relationship between God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. Enable them to put into practice Jesus' instructions for life, to love God with all you do, say, think, feel, and will, and to love all others as you are loved. This is what it looks like to lead well in chaotic times. And I pray that as we go and put this into action, we will see God's Spirit move amongst us, and we will see his kingdom come. God bless you. Go in peace.